Hello world and welcome once again. So today we are going to take a look at something really interesting, and that is mutation observers and intersection observers. They are two important concepts in JavaScript and also TypeScript, and we have seen and actually interacted with them, only maybe we didn't know that they were intersection observers and mutation observers. An example is the infinite scroll. So when I scroll to the bottom, I should see the loading component or loading indicator. Then content is loaded and more content is updated on the UI. When I get to the bottom again, the same happens, and so forth and so forth. We have seen this in applications like YouTube, all right? So the other thing that we have seen, and I believe we are all familiar with, is whereby you cannot be able to accept terms and conditions unless you have read everything all the way to the end. So when we start, in this case, it disabled by default this section, but then when I get to the end, the section is now available for clicking. So that's what we are going to be doing. So I can accept, and then the terms and conditions is dismissed. So two things we are going to learn. First of all is mutation observer. The other thing is intersection observer. So with that said, let's get started. A mutation observer listens on changes that are going to happen on a target element. So if you look at the name mutation and observer, mutation means change, observer means like observing, yeah? So it observes the changes that are going to happen. So that means we have to define it ahead of time. We have to set it ahead of time before the actual target that you are going to be listening for changes on receives these changes. In our case, when we look at our component, the list component is a target that you are going to be listening for as changes happen to it. And when the changes that are triggered correspond to what we want, that is when the mutation observer is going to actually be fired. All right. So let's see how to do that. We start by saying, back in our code, we will declare like here, private initialize observer, right? Then the first thing you're going to say is like here, constant observer, mutation observer. Then inside it, you notice this is a callback, and the callback, it will be receiving a sequence of mutations, the changes that are happening in this, for example, element that you are targeting. And those mutations, we can call them mutations, will be just a sequence of lists here, a list of items that are going to be emitted with time, all right? Then inside it, we have the ability to actually loop them. We can loop them and we see, is this mutation a mutation that we are actually interested in? Is this mutation maybe in a child list? Is it a subtree? Is it what? Okay, so we are going to say mutations, all right? For each of the mutations that are happening, we are looking at the mutation. Then in our case, we want to target when the user scrolls all the way to the bottom. If we look at our infinite scroll HTML, we are going to see the structure is like so. We have the div of the list of elements that are here. Then we have a trigger, and this trigger is when we get to this trigger, that's when we are going to be firing like the end of the page has been reached, and then more data can be fetched. All right, so all we need to do first is to see, like, this mutation itself, this trigger itself, it's actually behind a load trigger. It's not shown by default. It's only shown whenever we have like received the data. We say show trigger, okay? And then this trigger will actually now make it easy for us to it's like we are interacting with it by scrolling into it, okay? So then here we come and we say, because it's the target, so we say if the mutation, all right, added nodes, the nodes that have been added, is this mutation included adding nodes, okay? Under nodes, it can be a list of nodes that are going to be added, but in our case, we are only interested in something that has a class name, okay? And that class name includes, in our case, this scroll, okay? So for us here, we can say that this mutation is of type any, so that we can get hold of the class name. Okay, so far so good. Now we are going to say now, like, of these nodes that have been added into this mutation observer, we want to only target the first node, and that node is this one. Okay, so we can actually save in here, target node, the first node, yeah, then we come and we say that dot class name. Okay, then we can now here just say observer dot disconnect. So what disconnect does is that it stops like observing changes that are going to be happening on the target palette, on the target parent element. But before that, all we need to now do is to say, because we have actually noticed that the scroll trigger has been are made available on the element, then if this is our target for triggering the next load, that means we now start like checking or listening for intersection between it and our parent element. Okay, so that means that we are going to add a new function here, and the function will be listen for intersection with load trigger. Okay, and the load trigger is a target node, so we can call this a load trigger target. Okay, which is a HTML element. Okay, and then this one will return nothing. Okay, so here all we need to do is to simply now call this. We call this and then we pass in our target node here. Okay, then the other thing we are going to do, okay, this we have already defined. So how do we start now even like deciding what we are going to be targeting? Observer has to start observing something. It has to start like, it's like, think of it this way. You have created the observer, but now you have to start observing the target that you want to listen for changes. In our case, when we look at the autocomplete or the suggestion here, we see there needs to be a target node and there needs to be a set of options. The target node in our case is the wrapper list. In our case is this wrapper. When like we maybe scroll, you get to the bottom, we get content displayed. So in our case, we need to define or find a way to access the native element of this wrapper. And in Angular, what you do is that you set like this way. You set an element ref, and then here at the top, we will say like this, private, all right, no, sorry, view child, and then we say view element versus list element, and then this one is actually a static one because it by default is there, so it's static. Then we just say private. Okay, and then this one, it will be of type element ref. Okay, element ref of HTML div, because it's a div element, and that's it. So here we can just say that. So when we get here, we will be observing this native element. Okay, then we need to pass in some parameters, and that means some other options, and these options, their configuration of what needs to be observed. In our case, we are only interested whenever this scroll trigger is available, okay, in this list. All right, so here we come and we say the child list is true. Okay, and then that should be it. So if we save this one and then we come and we say maybe we console log this, we see what we'll have. Okay, invalid character, what is going, let's see, I believe it's a typo somewhere. It's a typo. Okay, so it's loading but nothing. Why? Because we have not yet called this one initialize observer, and we said we need to initialize it in a place that makes it possible for the observation to happen, and that place can be somewhere like here. Whenever we have actually fetched the data, we do this. So initialize observer, because remember, once we detect, we stop observing. That means this will be a single shot. Each time the data is fetched, we need to observe for the availability of the scroll trigger. All right, so if we go back and we try and console log, we will see that we can now load trigger target is this one at the bottom that we have actually received here. So as you see, it's so easy for you to set up and for you to even listen for mutation data. All right, so all like we did was simply create a new mutation observer, listen for the mutations that are going to be emitted, and then pick the specific element we want to detect its presence on the element, which is our parent in this case, is a native element. Then after that, we just observe this native element for the changes and we set child list to true. Okay, so the next thing we are going to do is to now go ahead and see when do we get to intersect with this load trigger, so that once we intersect with it, we can actually now call the fetching of data from the backend once again. Okay, so that's where we get to intersection observer. What does intersection mean? Intersection means crossing lines, like the lines, or think of it this way, the paths have crossed, like two intersecting lines. For example, we have line 1, like it's vertical, another is horizontal. When they intersect, they cross one another. The same logic applies when you think about elements in a HTML page. So for us to create an intersection observer, all we start by doing is this. We say new, we say an observer. In this case, is an intersection observer. We just say new intersection observer. Then, good thing is that we have an autocomplete, and the callback that we are going to get here is now the entries, and these entries are a list of those intersections that have happened. Okay, so this is a list of entries. Then this entries list, we can actually be able to get from the entries list, we get the target that we want, and the target that we want to see, is this target presently intersecting with the root element. Okay, so for us, all we need to say is the target element. Okay, we get the target, all right, from the entries. Okay, and then we will see like whether if this target is intersecting. All right, so is intersecting flag tells us that the target element, in our case the load trigger, if it is actually intersecting, if the most bottom part of our verses list, in this case the most bottom part, if we close this, is here. All right, is this the overflow, where the overflow starts displaying. So if it's intersecting that part, this is the load trigger. If it's intersecting with the bottom part of our parent, that is when this mutation observer is going to be triggered. Okay, so if we go back and we say, like in this case, we want to show loading. Okay, so that the users can know, like this, show loading is actually true. That's the first thing. Okay, then we want to hide the load trigger because it's already served its purpose in this session. All right, we come and we say this load trigger, we hide it. All right, and then after that we fire, because remember we are using, it's Angular, so we are going to be using change detection on push. So that means for these changes to happen, we just need to call a common change detector that has manual change detection. Okay, then after that we now begin fetching the data once again. Okay, when we fetch the data, what will happen is that this will come again and we say it will show loading, and it will set loading to true. So I think we can also actually remove this. And then we come here and we say, we set a timeout to mock server latency. Then we initialize observer once again. And then when we initialize observer, the whole loop continues again. So if we save this, then we come here, then we load all the way to the bottom, nothing happens. So why is that the case? Okay, the reason that happened is that even if we have defined our observer, okay, we did not start observing. And what do we observe? Yeah, we want to observe the intersection between this trigger and the most bottom part or most top part of the verses list. All right, so in that case we are going to add a new property, or rather an addition parameter in the intersection observer, and that parameter will have the root. All right, and the root can be the parent element. In this case it will be the verses list, or the root, if it's not provided, is the whole document. All right, and then good thing is that we already have a reference to the parent element that you are going to be targeting. So we already have it, so we just set it there. And then the other thing is the threshold. So how much of the scroll trigger do we want to see before we actually fire this part? Okay, for example, you set a threshold of like 1, it means 100% of it. If you say 0.1, that means 10%, and so forth. All right, so for us, we want the whole of it to be available so that the intersection can be invoked or triggered. Finally, we come and we say observer dot observe. Then here we are going to say the target element. So what is the target element that we are going to be observing is this one. Yeah, load trigger target. So we observe whenever this trigger I mean, whenever this trigger element crosses path with this root element, in this case, the root element is the versus list, then this part will emit, there will be an entry emitted, and the entry will have the intersecting property. All right, so let's test this and see how it works now. If we reload the page, we see our loading, and then if we go to the bottom, still nothing happens. So why is that the case? Actually, something happens, but what happens is that we are not setting the show loading here. So we should set show loading right here. Okay, so let's say show loading goes through, so that the show loader will be displayed. So this content will be displayed here. So it's now displayed. If we go to the bottom again, it's displayed and data is being fetched. All right, so I think that is pretty much it for that part. So let's go and recap what we have just done in the intersection observer. One thing to note, intersection observer, you have to observe a target and you have to specify the route that you're observing. Then you also have to specify how much of the target element should be inside the root element for the entries to be emitted, all right, for the callback to be invoked. Then after that, whatever you want to do with the result of the intersection, you do it here. So in our case, we just fetch the data. I believe that is clear, and I think that wraps it up for the infinite scroll. Always remember, you stop growing the moment you stop learning, and make sure that anything that you learn, share it with others so that you may grow together.